The Hogsty is brought to you by TicketClub.com, your one-stop shop for live events nationwide. Whether you're looking for game, theater, or live performance tickets, don't sweat it. TicketClub.com has you covered. So make sure you're going there for all your live entertainment needs, and make sure you're clicking over to them from the banner at the top of thehogsty.com.
The Hogsty presents It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and Rich Rogers. And now, here's your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of It's Just Business on the Hogsty Network, a show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports, industrial, entertainment complex. I am joined by my intrepid co-host, as always, Rich and Steve. Rich, check in with us today.
Hey guys, how's it going? All is well here in sunny but chilly Maryland, and I know I'm going to lose an hour of sleep tonight, but I'll make it up somewhere.
Yeah, you see, this is Steve. I'm doing fine. You know, I'm really awful about the switch from daylight savings times because typically I just stay up. When we gain an hour, I just burn it for no reason by staying up through the change. Because I have this crazy sleep pattern where I'll be up in the middle of the night for no reason whatsoever. It's awful. Yeah. So, yeah, I just tend to. Part of me says we ought to just dump the whole daylight savings time in the entirety and just leave it alone.
Yeah, I heard they're talking about that.
Well, and in Indiana, there's a place in Indiana where they don't do it. There's some weird holdout town or something.
Yeah, which is also just odd though too, because you're gonna have your time's gonna be off from everybody else, which is just ridiculous, just as dumb. Yeah. Let's just keep it. I think it all has to go back to trying to save energy and keep the temperature at a certain point in time to keep the power grid from being overloaded, and I think it's outlived its usefulness to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Although I will enjoy it being lighter for longer. All right, so let's jump in to our topics du jour. First up, we're going to check in on baseball as it starts to shake out the off-season cobwebs and get ready for its regular season launch here in probably about 3-4 weeks, something along those lines, right? April 3rd or whatever.
Yep.
Steve, why don't you give us a quick rundown on some of the change of play rules that have been passed, and we'll discuss them.
Okay, well, interestingly enough, first of all, Major League Baseball has officially named this season the 2018 Los Angeles Dodgers March to the World Series. So that is the name of the season, and everybody needs to refer to it as such from here on out. No, but you see, what was it, a while ago, we did a story about the popularity of various sports and how it had risen and or fallen over the years. And baseball had fallen just a real tiny bit. There is Major League Baseball, and certainly some of the fans see as a problem the length of the game and the pace of the game. For real hardcore baseball guys, I'm a pretty big baseball fan, so it doesn't really bother me, and I kind of enjoy the strategy and blah, blah, blah. But many people see it as boring when there's so much time between the actions. So baseball actually took action this offseason and tweaked the rules a little bit, including one pretty big change that all of which are designed to speed up the game. The most I think critical change that they have made is that the Major League Baseball has now limited the number of mound visits per game to 6 in the entire game. That includes manager visits to the mound. That includes the catchers coming to the mound. That includes, sometimes the shortstop will come talk to, or the first baseman will come talk to the pitcher. 6 in 9 innings is really, I think, a major change, and we can talk about that. The other thing they have done is they have sped up the clock in between innings, which is going to shorten the TV timeouts, and it's going to shorten the amount of time that the pitchers have to warm up. There's been sort of half-joking talk of relief pitcher carts, to drive the pitchers out so that they can have more time to warm up. But I think the most critical one, personally, is the change to only 6 mound visits per game, because I think that's going to dramatically change strategy in baseball. What do you guys think?
Well, they need to do something. I think when you look at one of the reasons why people are not, baseball fans don't watch is because the game is really slow, and I think they need to do something about it. But without messing too much with the integrity of the game. But I think that mound visits, timeouts, batter stepping in and out of the box, pitcher scratching, all this kind of, weird throwing motion stuff. It needs to be sped up a little bit.
I mean, it's interesting you say that because I kind of like the game the way it is. But I'm probably a bigger baseball fan than your average person out there, I would think, because I can't play baseball at all, but I really enjoy watching it, and I've had, kids playing it for a long time, and, I've watched a lot of baseball, put it that way. So I don't really agree with the need to speed it up. I think that limiting the mound visits to 6, there's times at late in games when they need to change signs.
Yeah.
And all of that, and if you run out of mound visits, it's going to be really tough to do that. So that's I'd rather them get the signs right than be limited by some artificial block on the catcher being able to go to the mound. Personally,
yeah. People who are hardcore fans never care about the length of the game, right? Like, when the NFL went through their phase of trying to speed up the game, it was probably about 10 or 15 years ago now, they were super concerned about that, and they did some things. I was one of those people that said, whatever, like, make it 45 minutes longer, because I enjoy it so much. So, but the middle fan, right, that's the target for this. It's not the non-fan, because who cares, and it's not the hardcore fan, because they'll watch double the length, right? Like, I love hockey. I would like to see them have more timeouts. They only have one. I think it's ridiculous. I think it cuts down on the strategy of the game, but they'll never do that. But it's that marginal in-between fan that is where they really are targeting these kinds of things to see if they can keep them longer, keep them coming back. So in this scenario, this baseball scenario, Rich, you're actually the target for these kind of rule changes to see if that changes your enjoyment of the game. Now, what I think is interesting about this rule change, I actually kind of think that there's an element of strategy around how you manage the 6 mound visits. I actually think it's kind of interesting from a strategic standpoint of the game, and I think it'll take a couple seasons, but I think once that sort of sets in as the norm, which usually is what happens with these rule changes, everyone is shocked and outraged and debates it, and then 5-10 years later, people think it's been there since the dawn of time. It actually adds an element of strategy. It could be interesting. The thing that I think is weird about this set of rule changes are actually the enforcement practices and the kind of little like in between things, and you can see how these things are going to get gamed. First of all, there's no in-game penalty. So I think it's fines for the pitcher. So, if I'm Yu Darvish or Verlander, one of these, mega millions players, am I, at a crucial time, the fine, I can swat away like a fly. So I think there's going to be some of that gamemanship. There's also that list of exceptions about how to do this. I like my favorite one is that in a rainy day, an infielder can come clean his cleats at the pitcher's mound. So there's some really kind of weird exceptions here that I think are going to get, especially in this first year, we're going to see all kinds of gamemanship about how to exploit those asterisks.
Yeah, but also, about the gamesmanship, it's not just a fine. The umpire has the right to toss people out. So, I mean, you can't just have, Yu Darvish give the double middle finger salute to the umpire and go, talk to and have him talk to the catcher anyway. Yes, he's going to get a fine, but if it gets egregious, the umpire can throw him out, for sure. The other thing that's interesting is what they didn't include. The big thing that they didn't include was the pitcher's the pitcher clock. And what the pitcher clock is for those of you who don't know is a clock between pitches, because you have guys like Kenley Jansen, for example, that walks around the mound and he takes a long time, and this is one of these things that for the fan, the average fan gets tired of seeing it. They want them to just pitch, pitch, pitch. The pitchers, of course, good pitchers get into a rhythm, and that's how they stay consistent. And so the idea is that the pitcher clock may interfere with some pitchers' rhythms. But I think the why they're doing this is what's interesting from a business standpoint. The why is that they want to attract average fans, as you say, and they want to keep them there. Because they want the audience to grow, and bigger audience means bigger revenue in terms of tickets and marketing and or ads and all the rest of it. And so they don't really care about me so much. They care more about you. You're the hockey nut. You're gonna watch baseball, but it's you're not gonna be crazy about it. And so they want. You're exactly right. I mean, I'm gonna watch it. I'm going to watch the Dodgers, whenever they're on, basically, or whenever I can get it at least, whereas you probably aren't. And so they want to keep you interested, and the only way they can do that is to speed up the game, and I understand that.
There's a couple interesting things, beyond the tweaks to the game that, from a business standpoint, I find interesting, and these are things that we won't necessarily know the outcomes even this season, but two little embedded things in this story that popped out to me are, one, that it was a little bit of a field skirmish between the Players Association and Major League Baseball, and that the union eventually came around and endorsed this rule change and played ball, but they definitely were hemming and hawing and slow-footing their way through it as a way to show some protest against the as we talked about earlier in a show, the Cold Stove League. So I thought that was a little interesting thing I noticed, that this was a little bit of a beef, a little place where they decided to be a problematic in towards of getting there. And then the other piece is the shortening of the TV timeouts. Is that an interesting tell about where baseball's business model is going, that they're willing to sacrifice that ad time to look for gains somewhere else? I'm not saying it's a sign of sickness, but is it a little bit of a peek about where they're putting their interest in their bets? Because that's not a small thing. That's over the aggregate year against all the teams. That's a lot of missed sales revenue.
Yeah. Of course, I don't know if it's actually sacrificing ad revenue, because all it's doing is sacrificing time between innings, and the TV is going to come back more than 2 seconds before the inning starts, and so what it may be, we're just gonna have to see when the season starts. But what it may be doing is just cutting back on the babble time, right before the inning starts. I don't know, and again, if teams bring what's the like the relief pitcher carts out there, like they drive Kenley Jansen out in a golf cart, that'll save a few seconds. So I don't know if they are sacrificing ad revenue. That it's an open question. We'll have to see.
Yeah, these things that sometimes these kind of collateral or sidebar things at the time don't seem that important, but then if you start to look at them over years, you look like, oh, that was kind of the ground zero for that, or that's so it's these interesting things that we don't necessarily look at now. This one is so wide. This one, it seems simple, right? Here are 5 rule changes, but there's a lot of baseball cultural things. There's a lot of stuff wrapped into this. This will be an interesting one to sort of track over the years. It's pretty multi-layered. Yeah, it is. And in terms of what you said, the NFL changed rules years ago. The NFL also changed their timeout and break structure last year. Right. In response to the same thing. The NFL, they didn't cut out ads. They just changed the structure of them. They limited the number of breaks and increased the length of each break. Which is different than, because baseball is limited by the inning, right? So the baseball doesn't really have that option. So I think obviously the whole thing is designed to attract more of the average fan. Exactly like you said, it's not going to attract the non-fan. The non-fan may watch the World Series, and that's it. And the fact that there's only 6 pitcher mound visits isn't going to change anything, except for people like you who are going to get bored by the 6th inning and go, okay, I just can't take it anymore, and let's watch The Bachelor instead, or whatever. Hopefully not The Bachelor. Fair point. As I just finished watching the season of The Bachelor, what might be fun outcome of this would be if the golf cart thing becomes a reality. much like entrance music, I want fully tricked out, customized golf carts per pitcher's personality.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you go with it, right? Because again, I mean, if you have some big time closers, Kenley, for example, can you imagine what they would have done with Mariano Rivera's, golf cart, Metallica Black, playing it, Enter Sandman, playing while he's driven out there. I don't know.
Considering baseball's biggest business plus is their in-game experience, and those are the kind of things that completely enhance the in-game experience. So it'd be interesting to see those outcomes too.
Yep.
All right, our next topic is kind of a fun one, sparked by some of what's going on in the news. As most of you, if you're a sports fan with a pulse, have been seeing that Peyton Manning has been recruited and wooed by the major NFL broadcasters to join as a color commentator in the booth. I think just on Friday, we're recording this on a Saturday morning, he turned down ESPN's offer, although Fox is still in play. Some interesting reasons, maybe, people surmising why he would choose one over the other. We can get into that maybe or not. But that's a first major move for Peyton past just being a commercial endorser, which is also legitimate. So that's got us thinking a little bit about the business and professional lives of athletes once their playing days are over. Peyton is kind of one of those giants in sports who I think a lot of people are kind of waiting on to see what is his second act, just outside of horsing around with country stars on bad commercials. So maybe we could start off. Where do we think he ends up in a booth this year, and see what happens? Also, he left Papa John, so lots of Peyton business news. But then jump from there about what are some of our favorite or interesting post-sports business athletes. Rich or Steve, go ahead.
Well, sorry, a little confusing there, but on Peyton, first of all, I think he'd be brilliant in the booth. The dude who's got a football mind, unparalleled, and he can clearly talk. He clearly has personality, on the basis of all those commercials, he did, Papa John's and otherwise. So I think it'd be brilliant. And he sold what he did is he sold his Papa John's interests. I think he was an owner of several Papa John's chains, and he, for whatever reason, he sold them. I don't know if that means anything, if it had anything to do with, the NFL dropping Papa John's as a sponsor, or he just, his advisor told him to sell it. I have no idea. But certainly I think Peyton would be brilliant in the booth just from a speaking perspective. And also he's got a Q rating that's so high. That's why all these networks are pursuing him. So from the Peyton aspect alone, he's going to make a truckload of money. Did you say it was $10 million? That was the offer, Chris?
No, there's no official offer, but people are saying that's the range.
Okay. It's just stupid money, and the reason is he's so popular and he's brilliant in terms of football. At least he's brilliant.
And a interesting aspect about why Fox and not ESPN that is a story out there is because Thursday Night Football is less games for the same amount of money and no weekends. So that even makes that $10 million. If he gets the same salary for less work, kind of brilliant.
Well, I think I'd like to see him in the booth. I like Peyton Manning. He has, from what I understand, he's a really, really funny guy. A lot of his teammates say he was like one of the biggest practical jokers on the team. In terms of athletes and post-career success, I mean, he's no George Foreman with his grills, but he's definitely open to making a lot of cash, and maybe he might catch up. Steve, you may know more about this than me. Earl Campbell and his big meat company down in Texas. He may catch up to Earl Campbell with that, but we'll see.
It brings up a larger question to me because Peyton has already done well. Earl Campbell has his meat thing, but there's a whole sad story that goes along with him because he's got dementia and everything else.
Yeah.
George Foreman fell into the George Foreman grill, but he also happens to be a very charismatic and gregarious guy, and so he went on a lot of David Letterman and Jay Leno shows and sold a lot of grills just because of his personality. But he literally fell into that. Somebody brought him the idea of, hey, endorse this grill, and just through a force of personality. He made it a household name. So kudos to him. But to me, we see Peyton doing well. We see, George Foreman's doing well. Tony Romo's doing well. But it brings up a whole other issue, because you're out. The Peytons, Derrick Rose, somebody brought to my attention that Derrick Rose has a crazy Adidas contract, and he does. Yeah. And so, for that person who knows who he is, I'm going to go over this real fast because he said it was interesting. Like, Derrick has $185 million contract, okay, with Adidas. And it's paying him just stupid amounts of money each year, like $12 million retainer, each year, more than $6 million in royalties, and the royalties is licensing his name on the shoes and T-shirts or whatever else there is. But it's also paying his crew. It's paying his brother, $300,000 a year in consulting fees. I don't know what his brother needs to consult anybody over. There's no consulting that needs to be done. It's a shoe deal, And it's paying another friend of his, that's one of his people, another consulting fee. Use of a private jet. It's a really, really large contract. And, Adidas is not getting their money's worth since Derrick is a shell of his former self. So that's Derrick Rose. But the bigger issue to me is, for every Peyton and every Derrick Rose, Chris Bosh has been in the news recently, just this past week about he's talking about how hard it was to transition. But Chris has a lot of money, so he's going to be fine. But for every one of those guys, there are 20 more who didn't make a ton of money, that kind of money at least, and don't have an education because they didn't finish college. They are struggling with transitioning into the real world. They don't have any real job skills. They end up broke. They end up divorced or worse. And so, to me, what I'm sitting here wondering is whether the major sports leagues need to do a better job of post-transition management with their former players. The problem is, of course, they don't really have an interest in it because they don't make any money off them now.
You have. Just real quick. I forget, there was a statistic that came out about, so we see these guys, a lot of the players, come off the field or come off the court, and then they go into broadcasting, and it looks like it's so easy, but there's like a ridiculous amount of guys who actually audition for these like few prime positions, and we look at and we see the guys that make it, but there are like hundreds of guys that audition that don't, and I think that's
you're exactly right. I mean, there's hundreds of, a lot of, the NFL does a whole broadcast seminar in the off season that these guys go to. Right. I'm sure that's probably hosted by some of the networks. But for every Tony Romo, there are a lot of guys who want to do that. They just don't have the skills to it. Some of them end up in local radio, like Doc Walker and Brian Mitchell, end up in local DC radio. James Worthy does Laker Network stuff, in LA, for example.
And those are great. Those are great jobs. And even if you include those regional, it's still a small set.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because there's throw in the Doc Walkers of the world, and we love Doc. Doc's been a guest on our show a couple times. He's great at it. For every Doc Walker, there's a bunch of guys who just don't have the capability to do it. They're just not very good at it.
Charles Mann, who tried for years and never got traction.
And he was really stiff, and it just didn't work. And he obviously knows as much or more as anybody about the game, but it didn't work. And Charles also has other business interests, and he's doing okay himself. My question is really, does the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, and even NHL have a responsibility, any sort of responsibility to help these guys transition?
I don't think so. Well, yes. Yeah, I think they have to give them opportunities to sort of point them into where their skill set or where their interests are post player days. But there's just not enough jobs.
Well, especially basketball, because a lot of basketball, I'd say maybe most basketball players probably don't have a degree, because how many seniors, high school, college seniors get drafted? Not very many, right. And so these guys, if you're not Chris Bosh, if you're a guy who lasted a couple years in the NBA and you made good money while you're at it, but then you're out of the NBA, you're not playing basketball, you don't even have a college degree, you don't have a lot of job skills, not life skills, Rich, but job skills. What do you do? And on top of that, you've been a coddled athlete your whole life. You don't have a good perspective on the world anyway. It's not like you're going to know to march into, some corporate office and submit your resume. And even if you did, you don't have the skills for it. I think it's a problem.
Well, the other thing, and I mean, couple that with, which brings up another point. If you're not vested into the pension plan, if you're not, I don't know, you can probably
the NFL. It's 3 years. It's three years.
So if you don't make it 3 years,
seasons.
Yeah. So then you're really in a tough spot.
Well, the pension doesn't start immediately anyway. The pension starts at I think 50 or something like that. So I mean, these guys have to make it 20 more years anyway. Or 20, or more than that in some cases. Go ahead.
There's a great ESPN 30 for 30 on this exact issue about, the sort of, I can't remember the name of it right now. Maybe I'll dig it up and share the link on Twitter or maybe in the show notes. But it's about the issues of bankruptcy in players. And really, it's got a lot of good talking heads, a lot of good cautionary tales from all sports. It's a really good hour documentary on this exact topic.
Well, see, the other thing is I don't know if this should be placed all on the leagues anyway, because there's players' unions, out there. Like, does the NFLPA have a role in this? They absolutely 100% should. Because you can be a retired member of the union, for example, and I don't know what kind of programs they have. They probably have something, but clearly it's not good enough. I think really and truly almost maybe the majority of the onus to protect these guys probably ought to fall on the union. What kind of transition program do they have? Do they have an office that will continually help manage someone's career, and present job offers and whatnot? Or is it just like, you get a one-day seminar and you're done, okay, get out? I think they need to take better care of the players. And a lot of these guys are smart enough to have business interests. Like if you guys remember Ricky Jean-Francois, who had a cup of coffee with the Redskins, he owns a bunch of Dunkin'. It's on his Twitter page. He owns a bunch of Dunkin' Donuts, chain of, so he's doing fine, for example. And there's a lot of players like that. And I think there's a mentality amongst athletes, more so than in the general public, to take a risk on starting a business because they've been taking risks their whole lives. They take a risk on the court or on the field every single game. And so to them, risking some of their own money on a business is probably a lot less stressful on them than your average person. It's.
I think part. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
This may be a first in It's Just Business history, but I'm actually going to take some of this responsibility has to fall to the individuals too, right? Like it can't all be the corporate structure, the game, the union. A lot of this is just asinine decisions, being hoodwinked by friends, family, and con people. It's just investments that look ridiculous at first blush that they dump tons of money in. It's actually, which I know youth has its own hubris, but that, they don't see anything past 6 or 12 months out in terms of like getting a degree or investing right or just putting it in a freaking bank, in a savings account or, a low yield, some kind of low yield fund even would have been beneficial for lots of these players. So, at what point do we also look to the individuals? These are people that, have given great gifts, great opportunities, great systemic advantages and still make just horrific mistakes that there can be some blame to the individual. And I needed to go do some liberal penance now after this show.
I know you do. It's because we've had a role reversal. I'm here talking about the structure helping the individual, and it's like, what is going on here? I'm gonna go out and vote for Hillary or something. Just Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I mean you got guys. You got guys that some guys have never had money before, and when you never have money, you don't know how to manage it. And as you mentioned, you've got family that you feel like obligated to take care of, and depending on, I mean, whose family, a fourth cousin or some obscure uncle that you need to take it. It's, but you know, they do have a certain responsibility. I mean, there are guys that are on networks. I'm like, I don't know how they got, like, for instance, I've always wondered why LaDainian Tomlinson got his job on the NFL Network, because I just think I don't just be honest.
You don't enjoy listening to him.
He's probably a nice guy. He doesn't speak as well as I think of someone on TV or television should, but anyway, these guys some of these guys do struggle. I mean, you've got guys in the DC market like Ken Harvey who tried. He wasn't very good. Charles Mann wasn't very good. Jeff Bostic isn't very good. But some guys do break through. I mean, D'Angelo Hall looks like a natural on television, so he may have a bright career. Chris Cooley has been able to transition well. So.
Well, yeah, and I do. D Hall, what you're talking about is D Hall did an interview just this week in which he looked brilliant, at it, and Ken Harvey has got some business interests. He's actually doing well too.
Yeah.
But I do. It is weird, Chris, because it is kind of a role reversal. Because I do feel for some of these guys, because if you take, a coddled athlete, and let's be honest, the bulk of in the NFL, it's 75% African American, roughly, and a lot of these guys came from, unfortunately, and it's true for basketball too, poor backgrounds, where their family isn't educated. In the case of basketball players, they did one semester in college, and they probably didn't go to class anyway. Like for example, like Josh Rosen is going to be fine, right? His parents are wealthy. They're educated. I think his father's like a surgeon or something. Even if Rosen is a moron, his parents will make sure that he's fine. But you have a lot of these guys that they have nobody in their lives that know anything about anything in terms of financial management, and so the idea that we can just say, okay, it's all on you, bud, when nobody has given them any sort of financial skills whatsoever is unrealistic. Yes, it is their problem, but also, the educational structure and the league and the Players Association, I think, have some sort of responsibility to help give these people the life skills to properly manage their investments or their money.
Yeah, I'm certainly not arguing against that. Please don't people think that I am. But I just think, the interesting comparable here, and there's been a lot of research done on it. I don't have it at my fingertips, so I'm not going to quote it or speak to it that intelligently, is lottery winners. And actually the misery and lost fortune of lottery winners for lots of very similar type of issues. And, just even the going from zero to crazy in terms of income. It's an actually interesting comparable, lottery winners and athletes who make it big. Not just athletes in general, but athletes.
I have a real quick. It's probably time to move on, but I have a story about that. Had a client who won the lottery, and this was I was with a really big firm, and he came to this firm he knew enough to get a lawyer to help him, right? And so we got him a financial advisor lined up, CPAs and all these people, but the guy couldn't get the big picture in his head. He knew he needed help, but he didn't know what he needed. So you'd call him and you say, okay, let's set up the meeting with the financial guy next week, and he'd go, yeah, but I just want to buy a house, all I want to know right now is can I go out and buy the Ferrari? That was kind of the guy's mentality to it. And, again, he knew he needed help, but he couldn't get past the small picture, and that's exactly what you're talking about. I don't know what ever became of that guy. But that was the problem with him. And this is a guy who tried to get help and still couldn't really understand it. And so then you throw in an athlete who has a bunch of yes men around him, who are just trying to look out for themselves, and it's easy to see why they blow through millions. Clinton Portis being a Redskins example of that.
So go ahead, Rich.
Well, just real quick, Philip Buchanan, who used to play for the Redskins, went to the University of Miami, was a teammate of Clinton Portis, and Sean Taylor wrote a very interesting book about his experience with money and how he bought his mother a house, and then his mother turned around and ended up suing him because the mother couldn't pay the mortgage on it, and she was saying, "Well, you knew I couldn't afford this house when you bought it for me." So that's just mind-boggling.
Yeah,
so
it is.
On that note,
So
on that positive note,
well, I'll give us a good out note, and we'll switch over to our last topic, which we have Rich queued up. But just to kind of look back in our conversation, in 1999, George Foreman sold the marketing rights to the grill for $137 million.
oh my goodness.
All right, so that gives it's a little bit of a giggle transition. So, Rich, take us into our next topic.
Which is what?
so it's that time. It's that time, ladies and gentlemen. It's free agency in the NFL. It's bargain sales, sales of the century. The Cleveland Browns are wheeling and dealing. The Rams are wheeling and dealing. Seattle is having a fire sale and dumping all of the. Looks like they're in a rebuild mode. But in all seriousness, this is time where contracts are made, and one of the things that I reached out to one of the in the ESPN writers, because I was fascinated or interested in how first round draft picks have that 5th-year option. And if you look at guys, if you get guys like on our Redskins, Brandon Sheriff will be up for a deal pretty soon. And Robert Griffin III, the Redskins exercised Robert Griffin III's 5th-year option. I think it's $16 million. But this is that time where you see big contracts and you see teams really trying to fit their players under the salary cap. And I'm actually glad the NFL has a salary cap, because I think there's a lot of and I don't know if this is a word, but it's funny, strategery with trying to fit your players under your salary cap. So what do you guys think? What are you guys looking forward to, just in terms of the finances and things like that?
Well, first of all, I think the word strategery, wasn't that coined by George W. Bush? Didn't he say that at a press conference or something?
Right. I think so. That's your
yeah. I think it was him that said that. Strategery, Anyway, so first of all, let's educate the public a little bit. The first-year option that Rich mentioned, this is a fifth year option that Rich mentioned. This is a collective bargaining agreement mandated thing that affects only first-round players. All contracts for players drafted in the first round have a team option for a 5th year connected to it, which means that the team can keep this player for a 5th year just by exercising the option, and it's at a certain amount of money. The reason this was a compromise, because the prior collective bargaining agreement had first round contracts at 5 years, and the players don't like that because it gets them to free agency 1 year, 1 year sooner, or 1 year later rather. And so, but the teams like it because they want their guys under control. So the compromise was a team option. That's where it comes from. So, and you can't renegotiate a first-year contract before year 3. And so, in the case of Brandon Scherf with the Redskins, Scherf is going into his 3rd year, so they can they can do a contract extension if they want, or they can exercise the option and keep him for the 5th year, one or the other, just as an example. I do think that there's a lot of strategery, as you say, involved in the salary cap management and whatnot. I've always said, and I think I said on this show, that the salary cap is really a hedge by the owners against themselves more than anything. It's not that they want to make the game more interesting by having a salary cap. What it really is they want to keep themselves from having to spend more money. Yeah, that's really what the salary cap is.
What I think is interesting and different this year has been, and it hasn't just happened in the last 6 weeks. It's been a little bit of a steady increase over the last couple years on trades as a viable strategery tactic of NFL teams. It wasn't that long ago that you were lucky to get one trade a year, and usually of the marginal player for late round draft pick variety. But the the amount that we're seeing players and good, solid players at the end of their rookie contracts, like that linebacker out of Los Angeles, Ogletree. You're really seeing a lot of interesting trades, remake rosters, and I think seen as an end around to some of these free agency and rookie contract conundrums. So I guess that's back in the tool set of GMs.
It is, and like the Cleveland Browns are going crazy. It's funny because the Cleveland Browns are literally recreating that movie Draft Day. Like as we speak. Maybe Kevin Costner's about to become the GM. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting that the trades are coming back because the NFL isn't a big trade league. The Major League Baseball has always been the big trade league. But yet so many of them happened this year, and I don't know if it's a major shift in anything other than just luck. The cards have kind of come together for a bunch of trades. But for those who are wondering why there's so many trades, it's not anything because contractually, it's not anything because of the collective bargaining agreement, or anything like that. They're just happening. They're just happening, and it begs the question. Really, why is negotiation limited to the start of the league year? Why can't these contracts be? Why don't they push the deadline back to week after the Super Bowl? It would make it more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think trades are interesting until everybody. This is the time where everybody is excited. Everybody hits reset.
It's a silly season.
Everybody thinks their team has a shot. I mean, everybody's like oohing and on over the Eagles and some of the moves that they've made, and the Rams and some of the moves that they've made. But you still got to play the games, which is the beauty of the NFL. You look good on paper before you play the games, but you never really.
Is there? Let's steer this to a business perspective. Is there money to be made by the NFL for to expand? Can they monetize this season somehow better than they are, and can they expand it in such a way that that it brings more people in? Because that'd be the reason to do it, right? Because it's all ultimately about money in the first place, and so. I almost think sometimes there's more excitement with the free agency period than in the actual games, to some extent. I love football, don't get me wrong, but I think there are a lot of people who are almost more excited about the possibilities in the offseason, than they are, when their Browns have lost 12 games in a row, for example.
I think the money-making possibility, and this is something that I touched on before. I think the NFL, the more access they give fans to some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, is what would make money. I've always thought, as I've mentioned before, one of my favorite shows on the NFL Network is Sound Effects, because Sound Effects gives the fan access to what players and coaches talk about on the sidelines. But what if you extended that to the off season and some of the discussions about trades and personnel things and contracts and stuff like that? I think I would actually watch.
And I agree with you. I would love it. I would watch all of it. But the weird thing is that these GMs are the opposite of that. Team GMs want absolutely nothing to do with any of that. If you walk into an average NFL building, the marketing people and everything are in one corner, and then the scouts and the football guys are in another, and they're in their own little locked rooms, during the off season.
Yeah.
And I think there are 0 of 32 teams would want cameras in their offices, discussing, player moves and whatnot. I think no GM would want that, as interesting as that would be. So how to monetize that, I don't know. I mean, more in different, would it be worth Fox Sports, for example, doing a Sunday morning recap show, to recap the week's events in free agency, for example?
Yeah, I think that's the only way to monetize this. Because one, yes, GMs are not going to allow that access, and the reality is it doesn't happen fast enough in real time for it to be engaging, right? Like you wouldn't put a live camera in a GM's office, right? Like that it'd be boring for 97% of the time. So
watching him read contracts and
Yeah.
stare at his computer and
And so the only way to really monetize it is more focused talking heads type shows. And you could also make a pretty solid argument that we're pretty saturated with talking heads shows in the sports business. So is there really that much more room for that? I don't know. Maybe. I would probably be more interested. I got to be honest, and there was a Hogstye poll on this, I guess, last week or recently. I find the NFL Combine unwatchable and one of the stupidest things that could ever be put on TV. So, and I know I'm on the minority there. So I'm not saying...
That was my poll, by the way.
Yeah.
You're bashing my poll, my own
Nope,
poll.
the poll was great. I'm just saying I voted for don't watch, don't care.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay. That was an option in the poll.
Yeah, I voted for it. So if you can monetize, but at least that's an activity, right? If you want to watch 300 guys run 100-yard sprints, then at least that's
Which
happening.
I do every year.
Right. So that's fine. I'm not judging you. But
yes, you are, but that's okay.
At least that's a thing. It's live action. It's there's no equivalence to general manager.
Yeah. I don't, well, yes, I agree. I think the combine is, to see, a 300-pound man run a 40-yard dash is just ridiculous.
Am I the only one that watches the entire combine every year? Neither of you guys do that?
Yeah, it's, I used to get excited about that stuff, but no, I think, now, what will be fascinating is like a day in the life of Eric Schaefer, the Redskins cap guy. I would actually be interested.
It would be the most boring thing ever, actually. The day in the life would be him staring at a computer and be on the phone all day. That's what a day in the life of Eric Schaefer is.
Talking to agents, and I think people have this. The other thing is, I think people have this inflated view of like what Bruce Allen, from a business perspective, in terms of actual Redskins stuff does. Bruce Allen doesn't. He's
in
not
his office
running
all day.
the team.
He's in his office.
He's not running. He's doing stadium stuff. I suspect he's doing deals with like Richmond because they just renewed. They just did a refinance with. He's doing stuff like that. He's not watching Vita Vea's tape from the University of Washington.
If he is, he's doing something wrong.
He's not at watching Sonny Michel. He's not doing that. That's Doug Williams and Kyle Smith and those other guys.
And so I don't know. And so the answer, we started this in a what happens in free agency, and I think we've explained that. I think that the reason why there's a limitation on when these contracts can be signed and whatnot is you have to impose some sort of sense of order on it, there is a mechanism where teams can sign players early, which is called the futures contract, but there's a limit as to how many years how old these players can be in terms of experience. You can't sign a 12-year vet to a futures contract, for example. So really it's the limitations are to impose a sense of order on the process, not really so much to entertain the fans. My question was, could they do a better job of monetizing this via getting fans more interested in the off season while at the same time imposing that sense of order? And maybe it's not possible, but that's what's been going through my head.
Yeah.
All right, so we will probably return to this topic a little bit after some of the dollars and cents shake out, after the silly season is completed or winding down and we're on to fumes. But we have come to the end of another episode of It's Just Business. So we'll do our outros. I can be found at ChrisLarry33. Would love to debate and talk and hear your ideas for future episodes, so please hit me up. Rich, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter at DiscoQue5 on Twitter.
And you can find me at the Hogstye. As always, I do not have a personal Twitter, so please don't try and hunt me down because you will not find me.
All right, an international man of mystery. And with that, we will sign off. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Goodbye.
All right. Take it easy, guys.